Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GBNews.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
I'm Tamsin Roberts and this is your latest news update. The Prime Minister says there are no compelling excuses to delay introducing measures to control climate change. Boris Johnson told a press conference at the G20 the countries most responsible for the current emissions aren't doing their fair share of the work. He also said that promises made at the Paris Climate Agreement aren't being upheld.
But hundreds of summit speeches, press conferences like this later, those words and promises are starting to sound, frankly, hollow. The science is clear that we need to act now to halve emissions by 2030 and keep 1.5 degrees within reach. There are no compelling excuses for our procrastination.
Boris Johnson also spoke about the fishing row with France, saying he's puzzled by a letter from the French Prime Minister suggesting the UK should be punished for leaving the EU. Earlier at the G20 summit, Boris Johnson had asked President Macron to de-escalate growing tensions. France has threatened to bar UK vessels from some ports and tighten customs checks on British lorries if the issue isn't resolved by Tuesday.
The record, I must say, I was puzzled to read a letter from the French Prime Minister explicitly asking for Britain to be punished for leaving the EU. And I just have to say to everybody, I don't believe that that is compatible either with the spirit or the letter of the withdrawal agreement or the trade and cooperation agreement.
The UK's International Trade Secretary says the UK and US are in talks to remove damaging tariffs from British steel exports. Earlier, the United States and the EU ended a 3-year dispute, suspending tariffs on steel and aluminium. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and the US President Joe Biden have also pledged to achieve global decarbonisation of steel production and trade.
The United States and the European Union have reached a major breakthrough that will address the existential threat of climate change while also protecting American jobs and American industry.
This new global initiative will add a new powerful tool in our quest for sustainability. It will be a major step forward in achieving climate neutrality, and it will ensure a level playing field for our industries.
Conservative MP Owen Paterson says he blames the Common Standards Committee for contributing to his wife's death. In his first live interview since he was accused of breaching lobbying rules, he told GB News the report is a complete denial of natural justice. The former Cabinet Minister faces a 30-day Parliament suspension following an investigation into his lobbying for 2 companies who'd paid him as a consultant. He rejects the findings.
This report has totally failed. It has not interviewed me properly. I produced 17 witnesses who've all corroborated my version of events. Anyone can recognise that if someone is not interviewed, not even met for 17 months after an inquiry is launched, during which time their wife takes their own life because, not entirely, we'll never know entirely why, but the pressures and the manner in which this inquiry was conducted definitely drove Rose to despair because she could see no end solution.
Well, that's all from me for now. I'll be back later on with the news headlines.
Good morning. You're watching GB News. This is The Political Correction, and I'm Nigel Farage.
I'm Gina Davison.
And I'm Marlene Foster.
And we're joined also by Paul Embry from home today. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge of debate. So please give us your thoughts, give us your opinions on the big stories of the day. You can tweet at GB News, or, if you prefer, you can email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Coming up this hour, it's a tale of two gatherings as the G20 wraps up in Rome. World leaders descend on Glasgow in a bid to come to an agreement in tackling climate change. We'll have all the latest.
Plus, MPs will decide next week whether to impose a 30-day ban on former Minister Owen Paterson after the Common Standards Committee said that Paterson had committed an egregious case of paid advocacy on behalf of two companies. This morning, we'll be speaking to Owen Paterson to hear his side of the story.
And if there's anything we talk about today you want to get involved with, then get in touch. Nigel's already given you the details, but one more time, gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction.
Right, well, it feels like they've only just arrived today, but we've got the G20. As that comes to an end, the circus moves to Glasgow, and it's going to be a very, very big couple of weeks. So Rome, right now, we've got world leaders there, the wealthiest nations in the world, 20 of them, coming together, talking about the global recovery after the pandemic, climate change, and in some ways, a curtain raiser, I think, for what's going to come in Glasgow.
So what exactly has been on the agenda and what has been achieved by the meeting? Well, one thing that's been achieved is that world leaders have backed plans for a minimum global corporation tax rate of 15%.
The G20 has also wanted 70% of the world vaccinated by mid-2022 and aims to set up a pandemic task force.
France has been calling on other nations to be more generous in donating vaccines to poorer countries.
Yeah, and Italy was hoping to secure key climate commitments ahead of COP26. However, no agreement has been made.
So what's your stance on the global minimum corporation tax? Because, you know, for me, one of the best things about leaving the EU was that we would be free to actually set our own tax policy. And now one of the first things we're doing is signing up to a kind of global standard.
Well, it's been a huge issue, of course, with the Republic of Ireland, who had this phenomenal competitive advantage for years. Lots of friends of mine's relocated to Dublin, you know, back offices, that kind of thing. And it worked really, really well. And you were pushing hard for this as well, weren't you?
Well, it was a huge advantage to them when they went to America, for example. It opened a lot of doors for them with major investors. And of course, we know that they have Apple and Google in the Republic of Ireland. It's all because of their low tax. And we had said to our own government, this is a real competitive disadvantage to Northern Ireland. What we need actually is to have the same sort of level of corporation tax, because we knew we could beat them on everything else. But in relation to the tax piece, it was very, very difficult. Yeah,
well, Diana, your question is the right one. I mean, what you're seeing in Rome today is globalism. It's a I'm not being, this is not a conspiracy theory, but it's a move in a sense towards global government. Big agreements. The whole point about Brexit, as you say, is being free to make our own decisions. So, yeah, I don't like it at all. I don't really understand why a British government would go along with it. I just, it's because it's Biden really pushing this hard.
Well, it is certainly,
in a big, big way, you know.
Well, for the very latest on this, let's actually cross over live to Rome, where we're joined by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, what's the mood like in Rome at the moment?
Well, I think the mood in many ways is, it's a good question, actually. What's the mood like? I think it's kind of pretty nonplussed, really, in many regards. As you say, there has been that decision on global taxation. Nigel's right in pointing out, very much pushed by President Biden to a large degree. Now, the argument, of course, they would put from it is that when you look at some of these global multinational companies like Google, for example, or Amazon, frankly, they're bigger in many regards than some smaller countries, and that if you want a fair balance across the board, that countries do need to cooperate on taxation together. When it comes to climate change, the other big issue clearly on the agenda today, when I say nonplussed, it's that, you know, they haven't really made substantial progress, but we are at the start of this process, this kind of curtain raiser here in Rome to COP in Glasgow, and those negotiations with the leaders on climate change, carbon emissions will carry on today before most of them actually get on their planes and head to Glasgow later on. And in many regards, it is a really difficult task. You're trying to get nearly 200 countries to agree to things. These negotiations take place in rooms with maybe 300 people there. How do you get 300 people to agree to things? It's incredibly complex, it's incredibly difficult, not helped by the fact that there clearly isn't the same political impetus, I think, from certain countries like Russia, like China, like India, some of the big emitters of carbon. They just are not necessarily on the same page as Western leaders like Emmanuel Macron or Boris Johnson or Joe Biden on this, and it is going to make it tricky. And the key question, and I was putting this to the Prime Minister yesterday, and we can't really get to the bottom of it, is what is the measurement of success in Glasgow, or indeed here in Rome? Where is the bar? How can we, as journalists or indeed as citizens, judge that actually they have made some progress on all of this? Now, Boris Johnson's argument about that, or his point, is that he is trying to keep this idea of maintaining global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees. If that is still an aspiration, then essentially that is a success. But just having an aspiration doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to happen. And you look at one of the other key things that the Prime Minister has been arguing for in the last couple of weeks, that is this idea that he was trying to raise $100 billion from kind of Western wealthy countries that would be transferred to poorer countries to mitigate some of the damages of climate change. That target is not now going to be reached this year. It's been pushed back to 2023. So, as I say, it's difficult to judge these things right now because this is going to go on for the next 2 weeks. Glasgow is not due to wrap up until the 12th of November. It's only then we'll get a proper sense. But at the moment, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk about aspiration, but no real sense of where the detail will be that we can judge that success has been achieved.
Darren, help me, please. I'm curious. Why is the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, in Rome speaking at a G20 event?
Well, he's come here to talk about climate change, and it's something that he feels very passionate about. He's talked in the past, hasn't he, repeatedly. And to be fair to Prince Charles, not just in recent years, but for decades, about the planet and how he feels that humanity is not necessarily having the best impact, that we do need to mitigate some of the damages we're doing. He is here to talk to leaders. I'm sure he's hoping that in many ways his argument, his status may well hold some weight. Though others would point out, Nigel, this is Prince Charles, who flew here on a private jet, will then go on to Glasgow on a private jet, as a man possibly has one of the largest carbon emissions individually of anyone on the planet. So, he is making his arguments, trying to convince and cajole people, but at the same time, when it comes to his individual responsibility, it's his position as well. But he is someone who has contributed an awful lot to climate change in some ways as an individual, more than
getting
almost
quite
anyone else
political,
on the
Darren.
planet.
It's getting quite political, isn't it? That's the point I'm making. That's the point I'm making. There he is with political leaders, and he's urging, in effect, legislative change. And I just wonder whether this is overstepping the mark for the royal family. No doubt a question we'll come back to. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's always really tricky with these things. Prince Charles may well argue, and we're going to hear from him actually later on this morning, that this isn't necessarily political. That actually, in many ways, we should get the politics away from it. He would argue that humanity and the future of our planet genuinely is at stake here, and that action does need to be taken, and that there is large political consensus in all of this. I think the argument he would make is that I think almost every leader around the world accepts climate change is happening, accepts that humanity is contributing towards it. It's just how much you try and mitigate that and at what cost that may well come at. But yes, of course, there will be critics who are suggesting that this is the heir to the throne getting too much involved, though we did hear from the Queen. She was heard making remarks, wasn't she, on a camera microphone a couple of weeks ago, saying that she wanted leaders to do a bit more, or that she wished they would step up to the plate rather than just speaking words. But yeah, these things are always tricky, constitutionally, of course, for our royal family. And the Queen was due to go to Glasgow, of course, to represent Britain. She's not now going to that, and Prince Charles will very much be taking up that mantle.
No.
Well, Darren, thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts, and we will be talking about the Queen a little bit later in the show. But Paul, I'm really keen to come to you on the point about this minimum corporation tax, because I think the intent behind it is to stop some of these global multinationals from being able to exploit different tax regimes. What's your stance? Do you think it's a good thing?
I absolutely do. In principle, it's the right thing, I think, to have a minimum rate. And the truth is that most people, ordinary people, I think, are sick and tired of huge corporations exploiting the current system, moving around the globe in order to avoid paying the right rate of tax. And some of these corporations have made huge amounts of money out of the recent pandemic. You look at Amazon, for example, with the increase in people going online and buying books, etc. It has to be right that we intervene and say, look, you're not going to get away with using loopholes in order to avoid paying your proper rate of tax. Ordinary taxpayers out there, ordinary working class people, are suffering at the moment in terms of the cost of living, in terms of living standards, and they see some of these big corporations getting away with murder. So it's absolutely the right move. My fear, if anything, actually, is that the rate is too low. That actually by saying it's only going to be 15%, you potentially encourage the industrialised economies that currently have a higher rate of tax. I think the average for industrialised economies is about 23.5% for corporation tax. You encourage them actually to cut it back to 15%. While still being able to maintain that they're doing the right thing. So in principle, absolutely the right thing. In practice, it should be higher. And yes, we need to start holding some of these big corporations to account.
Yeah, it doesn't mean, though, they're going to start paying huge sums of tax, because there are all sorts of other loopholes, Paul, that they will exploit, I'm sure.
Well, we go after them then, Nigel. We go after them and we close those loopholes. I mean, if other people, if ordinary working people tried aggressive tax avoidance or even tax evasion to get away with paying a lower rate of tax, then the state would go after them, and we shouldn't be afraid of going after these big corporations either. We shouldn't accept that they have us over a barrel.
Well, Paul, one thing we can do with Brexit is actually we can set our own tax parameters, set our own rules for foreign companies. So this is something, actually, if you've got big firms transacting business, large-scale business in this country, we could start to tax them directly. But, you know, that's a debate perhaps for another day, but I understand.
Unless you're in Northern Ireland, of course.
Yeah, well, yes, of course.
Well, we'll come on to Northern Ireland a little bit more later, but first...
Absolutely. We're now going to move on to talk about the UK and France, who have only 2 days left to resolve their increasingly fractious differences over fishing rights before Paris imposed deadline to introduce port restrictions and border checks. French officials have warned that it will bar UK fishing boats from some ports and tighten customs checks on lorries entering the countries with British goods from Tuesday, unless more licences for small boats to fish in British waters are granted.
The rows threatened to boil over as Brexit Minister Lord Frost accused France of a pattern of behaviour against Britain, with ministers in Paris having previously suggested they may restrict energy supplies to the UK and to Jersey because of the disagreement. Nigel, I'm sure you have strong views on this.
Yeah, well, I was at sea yesterday.
Yeah.
I was at sea yesterday off the South Cornish coast. I was given some footage of a French vessel fishing inside the 6 miles on the 8th of October. And I'm going to package that up and send it to George Eustace and say, what actions are you going to take against that boat? Because, you know, we've got a boat was impounded the other day, yes. As you know, a British boat. Here's the thing. You know, we actually thought with Brexit that we'd get back control of our territorial waters. And in theory we have, but in practice we haven't. And the sheer number of foreign boats that are fishing between our 6 and 12 mile limit is unbelievable. About 97% of applications from EU countries were granted. The only couple of dozen that weren't granted were boats that could show no historical record of fishing close up to Jersey or indeed in parts of the English Channel. Maybe there should be a bigger debate. Why are any of them being allowed in our 12-mile limit? Because environmentally, this is very, very destructive, and I thought this government was green. So I feel quite strongly about it, and I don't know. I mean, I guess Boris's fear is some kind of trade war. Boris's fear will be maybe in the short term they can hurt us more than we can hurt them. I don't know. But I think this is an essential matter of sovereignty, and Jersey... You know, we have got to stand up and protect Jersey. And if there is a big blockade this Tuesday, which is being threatened, let alone a cut in power, this is a big moment for the Prime Minister to be strong and to know that here we've got huge numbers of boats fishing in our waters. And do you know how many British boats fish between the 6 and 12 in France? 1. So the whole thing's a mess, and Boris must stand strong, and I'm sure the party will be right behind him being strong on this.
Yeah, incredibly kind of strong views from myself, from a lot of colleagues on this point of this need to really show strength at this vital moment, because, you know, the French are trying to make out that it's us not kind of sticking to our commitments, but actually, as you rightly said there, Nigel, 97-98% of the applications have actually been granted, and those that haven't are the boats and are the fishermen who can prove no link, no past history of actually fishing in British waters. So we're actually sticking to our word, we're sticking to our side of the agreement.
Yeah, we're sticking to the deal.
Precisely.
I mean, I actually hate the deal. I think, you know, there were two parts of the Brexit deal that were really unsatisfactory, fishing in Northern Ireland. But yes, you're right, we are sticking to that deal.
Precisely.
And they just want it all.
Yeah, but it's also the language that's been used by the French.
Yes.
I mean, this is an EU-UK deal, but yet the French are allowed to use a language that is quite unbelievable in terms of, you know, you have to meet force, you punish the UK for leaving.
Yes.
I mean, you would never hear that in diplomatic services, and yet they're allowed to go ahead and use it.
Extraordinary.
Absolutely not. Well, stay with us, because coming up, the Prime Minister has told the EU that real progress must be made as talks over the Northern Ireland protocols remain in deadlock. We'll have the latest.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Time to hear your thoughts and views. And Matthew says, good morning, GB News. Well, I've listened to Prince Charles and had enough of him already. I've got to tell you, Matthew, I feel a bit like this. And I'm really worried. It's all well and good to say that this is a cause that Prince Charles believes in. I know, because I met him face to face in 2007 in the European Parliament when he said the North Pole will be gone within 7 years. And this level of alarmism is one thing, but I think he's dabbling in politics, and I think it's very dangerous for the royal family personally.
Arlene?
OK, and we have Kevin here who's come to comment on the tax story. We'd be interested to see how the UK deals with the minimum 15% tax rate. Most of the world's tax havens are UK dependencies in the Caribbean. Will the UK government encourage these zero-rate low-tax havens to meet this obligation, or will a blind eye be turned? That's an interesting point, actually, about our overseas territory.
Yeah, Cayman Islands and of course, the Channel Islands, too.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Sticking on the tax side there, we've got Lee who said 15% is the minimum and very few countries have a rate lower than that. But we should reinforce this by not allowing any companies registered in a country that has a rate lower than the minimum to trade in the UK. Interesting proposal there from Lee.
Yeah. On climate change, Wendy says, let's get constructive and stop the destruction. Stabilise the patient, as they say when someone arrives in A&E. Stop illegal logging, stop illegal fishing, stop further exploitation of peat bogs, and, of course, plant trees. Wendy, I'm with you. I'd love to hear some more positive talk.
Yes.
We hear so much about cutting emissions, and we're perfectly happy, of course, to import coal and import gas and think we're doing a great job. And there's far too little talked about in terms of the sequestration of carbon dioxide. So, Wendy, I'm with you completely on that.
And just on the G20 again, Alan says, beware all, globe-trotting Greta Thunberg is in town. Hope she will cut down on her carbon footprint. I think she arrived by train, though, to be fair.
I think she did, yeah.
She did, yeah. She didn't fly, although there'll be many, many people flying into Glasgow over the next couple of days.
25,000 of them.
Absolutely. And then one more back on Prince Charles. Lee says, if we did end up having a referendum on net zero, this level of activism from our next monarch will be somewhat constitutionally awkward, to say the least. Well, I pray there is not a referendum on net zero, because we just don't, we don't need it. We don't need another one.
I tell you what was interesting, and that was the polling released this week. So if you ask the public about climate change, do they think it's happening? They say yes. When you ask them, do they want to pay for it?
No, that's right.
They don't want to pay for it. They don't believe in heat pumps. But the figures this week in the Telegraph published showing quite a big majority in favour of a referendum on net zero targets, I thought was really interesting. Really interesting. And I'm not saying, I mean, I've always thought, Diana, that referendums should be more on constitutional issues. But I do wonder whether Westminster isn't getting very out of touch with a large segment of the population.
Well, I think that was the problem with Brexit, and that was shown through the referendum. But, I mean, we don't want to get into a period of rolling referenda on different issues, because I think that would be really problematical. But anyway, we're going to move on and talk about the protocol. We do nearly every week, unfortunately, but Boris Johnson has said that real progress must be achieved soon in the negotiations to find a solution to the issues with the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Downing Street said the Prime Minister told European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen during their meeting on the margins of the G20 that a fix was needed rapidly to prevent further disruption in Northern Ireland. Discussions on the protocol will continue next week, with Mrs Šefčovič, Lord Frost and their teams due to meet in Brussels on Friday.
Well, again, we're back talking about the Northern Ireland Protocol, and we hear language from the Prime Minister about we're going to need to find a solution soon. It has to be dealt with rapidly. But what does that really mean? Because we've been talking about this now for a whole year. We had the command paper in July, which set out very clearly what the UK government felt was needed to happen. Then we had the European Union saying, oh, we didn't realise that you were going to talk about the European Court of Justice. Well, it's in the command paper, so obviously it was going to be talked about. But there's a huge amount to be talked about. There's VAT, there is state aid, there are tariffs, there are trade, and of course we have to talk about the jurisdictional issue, because you cannot have in an international agreement the referee being one of the parties, and that's the fundamental issue.
Yeah, and don't you sense also, Arlene, and you may not want to hear this, but actually sorting out Northern Ireland becomes quite a low priority compared to the problems that we've got with France?
Well, and that's, France has always been part of the difficulties in sorting out the NI protocol. They've always taken a very hawkish view on the issue within the European Union bloc, backing up the Irish government on many, many occasions, and actually going further, actually, on some occasions. So it's almost as if the French have now moved on. They're dealing with the protocol, but they're now using fishing as well. So it's we all know there's a presidential election coming in France, but it is bash the Brits time for the French, and that's what they're doing on the protocol, and they're doing it now on fishing as well.
So, Paul, would you agree with that? Do you think this is some sort of political manoeuvring by Macron, or do you think there's more to it?
Well, I think he's engaging in a bit of shameless posturing and populism, dare I say. The very thing that, you know, he was elected to stand against is exactly what he's doing now. And it is a bit of shameless brick bashing, let's be honest about it. I think it owes more to French internal politics at the moment as much as anything else with the upcoming election, and he's being very belligerent in a number of areas. I mean, you recalled the ambassadors, didn't he, from the US and Australia. He's threatened to cut off Jersey, even stuff around the AstraZeneca vaccine, where he was very bullish on that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's quite clear what his game is. I don't think personally they have a huge amount to complain about in terms of fishing. But there we go. As I say, it's as much to do with French politics and Macron being a temporary populist, shall we say.
The relationship here with the European Union is interesting. Arlene mentioned it earlier. You know, Boris, we're told from today's press reports that Boris is begging the European Commission to somehow intervene. And it does raise some very, very big questions, doesn't it? France seem to do within the European Union what the hell they like as and when it suits them. It is quite extraordinary. Paul, what should Boris do on this? I mean, clearly, Jersey could be the flashpoint for this, and it could come as soon as Tuesday. But in a broader context, how firm do you think Johnson should be in the face of these threats?
I think he should be firm, but I think he should be diplomatic. It's the old saying in politics: never wrestle with a chimney sweep, because if you do, then you end up getting dirty as well. So my advice to him, not that I suspect he will take it, but my advice to him would be: look, keep the language on our side as diplomatic as possible, be as constructive as possible in terms of relations with France, in terms of dialogue, in terms of any negotiations. And if it's Macron's plan, which clearly it is, to ramp up the talk and the bellicosity to appeal to his own internal audience, then that's a matter for him. So tough negotiations, absolutely, but publicly maintain the moral high ground.
Okay, which raises a question: is prenez un grip? I mean, these sort of phrases, do we class that as diplomatic language, or is it just Boris's humour?
I think it's just Boris's humour. But what I will say is it's not just Macron that's using language that is quite inflammatory. It's his Prime Minister, who, of course, wrote to the European Union, his Europe Minister, who was talking about fighting. It's not a war, it's a fight, and all of this. So, I mean, it's not just people. Some commentators have said, unless and until Macron leaves the Élysée Palace, that the relationships will not improve. Actually, he's not standing alone. There are others in the administration as well, and I think we need to remember that.
Yeah, I think the letter was quite extraordinary, wasn't it? Effectively saying that we need to make an example of Britain and prove that there are massive negatives to leaving the EU. But this is just madness, isn't it? Trying to conflate these two issues, trying to conflate the fact that France is literally punishing us, and then saying that the EU should then use this as an example to try and prevent others from leaving. And we see the rising tension in, in places like Poland, and also even in Italy, where there is this sort of rising Euroscepticism. So, yeah, it's going to be a really interesting one to watch play out, both on the protocol. Arlene, what's your take on Lord Frost? Because he is very firm, he is very strong, but do you think he stays on the right side of diplomacy?
No, I do. I think he is very much poked at times, sometimes by Simon Coveney, sometimes by the French, and he reacts in a very calm, stoic way, if I can say that. But he's been very clear what is needed. And I go back to the command paper again, Deanna. I mean, it's all set out there very clearly as to what's needed to happen to the Northern Ireland Protocol. So when people feign surprise about the European Court of Justice, I have to say it's just a nonsense.
Well, still to come in this hour, I'll be talking to Conservative MP Owen Paterson as he gives his first interview since discovering that he faces the prospect of a 30-day suspension from Parliament after he was found to have breached Commons rules for lobbying.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
A former cabinet minister will learn next week whether MPs will suspend him from Parliament for 30 days for breaching Commons rules on lobbying. Conservative MP Owen Paterson was found to have repeatedly lobbied ministers and officials on behalf of two companies for which he was acting as a paid consultant. The names of the firms were Randox and Lynn's Country Foods. The Common Standards Committee said Mr Paterson's actions were an egregious breach of the rules on paid advocacy by MPs and recommended he should be suspended for 30 sitting days. But Mr Paterson responded by releasing an angry statement in which he rejected the Commissioner's findings and labelled the process biased and not fair. Well, I'm joined this morning in what is his first broadcast interview since these findings came out earlier in the week by Owen Paterson himself. Good morning, Owen.
Good morning, Nigel.
Let's just, from the top with all of this, you're a member of Parliament. You are allowed to have outside work. You're earning about £100,000 a year from these two consultancies. You're found by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner to have effectively not just have been an advisor to these companies, but a lobbyist for these companies. Isn't that of itself a breach of parliamentary standards?
Yes, if it was true, but it's not true. I was not lobbying. I was using the exception rule that you can bring a serious wrong to the attention of ministers or government agencies, even if it benefits a person or company you're associated with, if there is a genuine serious wrong. I've never raised these three companies in a question, in a debate, in Westminster Hall, in a statement. I've never been involved in any contracts they've negotiated with any government agency, because that would be improper. I judged on these three issues, they were so serious and lives were at risk, and I was privy to some exceptional information because of the exceptional technology involved. It would have been absolute dereliction of duty if I had not raised those issues with the FSA. So if you take the first two, Randox have exceptional technology. They found out that 12.5% of random milk samples, taken totally at random from British supermarkets, had antibiotics, including fluorphenicol, which is absolutely banned. Not a few parts per billion, 0. It is known to be carcinogenic. And we know that carcinogenic substances and also antimicrobial resistance are issues which the World Health Organization could say will be the biggest killers of human life in decades to come. The chief medical officer at the time said antimicrobial resistance issues were catastrophic. It would have been absolutely wrong, given my own personal background from a farming background, my own background here as a member of Parliament for North Shropshire, one of the biggest milk lakes in Western New York. A time as a shadow minister, where I travelled the world learning about the dairy industry, and then my 2 years as the deferent Secretary of State, it would have been quite wrong not to have used that knowledge to bring it to the attention of the FSA and to accelerate the story. As a result, that item is now being tested for, and British milk is safer. So this morning, when you put milk into your coffee or onto your cornflakes, you were safer thanks to my efforts. Similarly, on the issue of a carcinogenic product being deliberately targeted at young British children, which Professor Chris Elliott, Britain's leading food expert, said was the worst case of marketing he'd seen in 35 years. That also was resolved. It was brought to the attention of the Irish authorities. They acted very rapidly, and the company involved changed the formulation. So I'm actually very proud of what I've achieved. I find it quite extraordinary that this report has totally failed. It has not interviewed me properly. I produced 17 witnesses who've all corroborated my version of events. And this is a complete denial of natural justice. This inquiry started 2 years ago yesterday. If we said it was yesterday, the first time I talked to the Commissioner for Standards would be the 26th of March, 2023. That's how long ahead it would be if she'd started on this basis yesterday.
And how much time did you spend with Catherine Stone? She was in charge of this inquiry. Did you sit down and make the points to her that you've just made to us about safety?
Connection. Hello?
Hello. I mean, my question was, did you sit down with Catherine Stone face to face and make the points that you've made, that yes, you were a consultant for these companies, but you were, I think we've lost him, which is a terrible bore. Well, I'm sorry about that. We will endeavour to get Owen Paterson back. But either way, you know, what has been laid down?
Can you hear me? I'm back again.
Are you back?
Sorry, I had a phone call.
Fine, right. Take two.
So just very briefly, so this inquiry started 30th of October 2019.
Yep.
You go right round the clock. The first memorandum was produced 6 months after my wife took her own life in December 2020. I'd still not been talked to at that time. On the 2nd of September this year, the Commissioner wrote to the clerk saying she'd already made her mind up before that first memorandum was published. That first memorandum was riddled with factual inaccuracies, some of them quite comical, such as the suggestion I should have met the chief vet. I didn't just meet the chief vet. We had meetings in my office with a whole range of experts across the dairy industry, and we moved on from fluorphenicol to flucosides. And the experts have said, thanks to the result of those meetings, which we grandly call the Milk Quality Forum, British milk is safer. So I'm actually very proud of what we've achieved, and I wouldn't hesitate to do it again tomorrow. The tragedy for me and for my family is that none of this has been properly explored by a proper process. If you look at the ACAS rules, from those basic inspection of an issue in any small business, you immediately have a meeting with the person. Why didn't the Commissioner ring me the afternoon she read the article in the newspaper and said, I don't like the look of this, Mr. Paterson, what is your response? ACAS then goes on to say you have to establish what the terms are, what the criticism is, and both sides can exchange information. It's the most basic fundamental issue. Would be exposed at the beginning. Natural justice does not apply to members of Parliament.
Did you sit down with Catherine Stone face to face and make the points that you made here this morning?
I did not. I've never met Catherine Stone. Because of COVID, she wouldn't meet me. We didn't meet until the 26th of March this year. So that's 17 months from the time this inquiry was launched. And I did put questions to her. Well, the first question I put was, I've spent 25 years in business. I became president of my European Trade Association. I've been in Parliament for 24 years. I've never had an argument with the Fees Office. I've never had an argument with IPSA. I went right through the expenses scandal. Unlike senior members of the Standards Committee, I've never had an issue with any of the speakers. And yet I'm treated as a criminal from the beginning. And this is something I find very, very hard to handle, that I'm not treated with the respect of someone who has not broken any rules. It is a very, very difficult experience for me to be condemned from the beginning. And we know now, the Commissioner said she'd made up her mind before she wrote even the first memorandum, and her opinion hasn't changed. And the committee are equally at fault because I offered them in the meeting in September. I had one meeting with the committee and I said, here's the mobile phone. Let's ring these guys up on WhatsApp. There are two obvious witnesses that straddle two of the subjects. Let's ring them up. You ring them. Go on, ring them. And they've not rung a single witness. They've had the details of my witnesses since that call to the Commissioner on the 26th of March. Not one of those witnesses has even had a text. Now, that could not happen in a court of law. My lawyers are emphatic that if we'd suspended parliamentary privilege, we'd gone to a court, a judge would have chucked this out for improper procedure very rapidly.
So
what is so sickening is there is a procedure. Under standing orders, there should have been an investigatory panel, which there would have been a proper lawyer, a properly trained lawyer, who could have interrogated witnesses.
Owen,
So it's not only
this Wednesday.
Sorry.
This Wednesday, there's going to be a vote in the House of Commons on whether you're going to get a 30-day suspension from Parliament, which is a very, very, very serious sanction. Will you be able to speak in your defence in the House of Commons on Wednesday?
Well, I very much hope so, and I intend to speak. And I'm absolutely emphatic. By my actions, British food is safer and lives have been saved. And it would have been an appalling dereliction of my duty, my experience, and my knowledge not to have raised those issues. And as I've said, I would raise them again this morning. I wouldn't hesitate. And what is the point of being an MP if you have that knowledge and you have the privilege? It's a great privilege being MP to be able to bring this to the attention of the right authorities very rapidly. We were really concerned about the milk issue, and we really thought this could make the whole salmonella crisis in the chicken industry look like a jelly pudding. It could have really blown it up, but much worse, lives were at risk. There was a moral angle to this. It would have been immoral not to have raised these issues, and none of this has been explored by either the Commissioner or the committee.
You say that it's a great privilege to be an MP, but clearly the MP salary isn't enough for you.
Yes, but I think it's wrong not to allow people to have outside interests. I am handsomely remunerated, you're quite right, as an MP, and by the companies that pay me, but I'm very, very careful to keep the divide. So I stressed earlier, these companies are in daily contact with agencies of the British government. I have nothing to do with that, whatever, absolutely nothing. That would be quite improper. But these issues are being portrayed as selling expeditions, and emphatically they weren't. And the 17 witnesses all confirm my view. So I think it is good that MPs have outside interests. I wouldn't have had knowledge about this technology. I wouldn't have access to this very special information if I hadn't had an outside interest. So I think it is good that MPs do bring knowledge and ideas and new technologies to the attention of Parliament and the public services and bureaucracies. It's very important. These bureaucracies are very stick in the mud. One of the most interesting documents was from the FSA, who, in a private briefing, recommended that we should carry on with the status quo. Now, luckily, the status quo has some very good leaders in Heather Hancock and Tim Bennett. They recognised the seriousness of the situation and took action. But that was shocking. Maintain the status quo, 12.5% of milk with carcinogenic products in from the authority. Now, that is the purpose.
Listen, I absolutely hear what you're saying.
Having those contacts. But they have
I hear
to
what
be
you
monitored.
say, but as you know,
there has to be a policing system, but it has to be within the rules of natural justice. And the current
after cash for questions
doesn't go near that. Sorry.
After cash for questions, after the MP's expenses scandal, you and I both know that the public do not really like MPs having outside earnings at all, and that is a debate I think that's going to go on for some years, because do we pay MPs more? Well, if you ask the public that, they say no. So, I understand the argument you make that having outside interests gives you specialist expertise that you can speak on and try and improve things. And I get that. I understand that. Do you right here and now think you can win this vote on Wednesday?
Definitely, because I think MPs do have a sense of fairness. And anyone can recognise that if someone is not interviewed, not even met for 17 months after an inquiry is launched, during which time their wife takes their own life because, not entirely, we'll never know entirely why, but the pressures and the manner in which this inquiry was conducted definitely drove Rose to despair, because she could see no end solution until I was found out for something, just something, and then I'd be made to resign, and she'd have to resign.
So you
but I think MPs do have a sense of fairness. And what we must do on Wednesday is also talk about the future. This system is absolutely broken. And my case is the most shocking example. So I feel I'm speaking for current MPs to whom this could happen and future MPs. My daughter's written a piece in the Sunday Telegraph saying quite clearly she wouldn't go near politics, having been through this very close experience with me. So I feel very strongly no other human
if you're involved in politics,
ever be put through this again.
I know as well as you do, being involved in politics affects everybody around you. There is, no way out of that, and I think it does put people off getting involved. But are you really saying you genuinely believe that this case hanging over you was a direct contributor to the death of your wife, Rose?
Yes, I've said this on many occasions, the manner in which the inquiry is conducted. So I responded to all the questions in very great detail, and I pay tribute to my office staff who've gone through a terrible time as well. Don't forget, they've been very badly affected by this. We went into that in huge detail on the 16th of January this year, and we thought we'd answered it. But the inquiry came back, the commissioner came back with yet more questions, quite a long way away from the original newspaper allegation. And then back again in May with yet more questions, miles away from the original allegations. And that's what drove major element. We'll never know. You have to be very careful talking about this. We'll never know what triggered her decision to end her life. But it is absolutely clear, I'm quite clear, that last weekend she had a real go at me in the kitchen, saying, when is this going to end? You do realise they're going to find out something. However this goes on, they're somehow going to find something. They're determined to get you on something. And then you'll be forced to resign, and I'll have to resign, and we'll end our lives in humiliation and misery. So the human cost for our family is absolutely catastrophic. Bluntly, the last quarter of my life has been destroyed. And it's all because there's no proper process. This could all have been sorted out in a phone call way back on October the 30th, 2019, or if there'd been a proper exchange of witnesses, it could have been sorted out very quickly after Parliament reconvened. But this has dragged on in a manner which is absolutely shameful. And the whole process brings, I think, the deepest shame on Parliament. So we have a chance on Wednesday, not just to vote on my issue and my report, but we absolutely have to bring in measures to bring in a fair system which respect the rules of natural justice. There has to be an exchange of information between both sides. There have to be proper trained lawyers involved, and witnesses have to be professionally interrogated. None of that has happened in my case. So I'm quite clear, I must be the last case. This must never, ever happen to another human being again.
Thank you for joining us here on GB News this morning and giving us your side of the story. I wonder, Deanna, I know you're relatively new to Parliament and politics, but he does hit back with some very, very strong points of view, doesn't he, here?
Well, I think it's the point about the process and about fairness and actually clarity in that process as well. I've got a few friends, colleagues who've been kind of under investigation for various things. Most of them have been kind of thrown out. But it's that lack of clarity about how the process is going to work, how long it's going to last, how long, frankly, it's going to sit on your shoulders whilst something like this is being investigated. In Owen's case, the fact that this has been going on for 2 years, when, frankly, it could and should have been sorted out much more quickly. I'm really shocked that none of the witnesses that he provided were actually consulted. And in hearing him today, I think shows that questions definitely do need to be asked about how kind of parliamentary standards procedures are conducted, and that there is some transparency in those procedures. Because, I think, people fall foul of the rules for various reasons, sometimes knowingly, sometimes genuinely not knowingly. And it's right that they're picked up on, but it's also right that people should have, the chance to really defend themselves and to stand up for themselves against any of those allegations. And it sounds to me, hearing from Owen today, that hasn't been the case at all, which frankly is shocking and shows that we do need to reform the system.
I think he raises some very, very key issues on due process and natural justice. I think it's incumbent upon Parliament to answer those questions from Owen. But the second thing that I really wanted to reflect upon was his family story and the fact that his daughter has felt strongly enough to write in the Daily Telegraph today about the impact that this has had on families. Those of us involved in politics who choose the life know what we're getting into, but the families are the collateral damage in all of this, and I just think it's a heartbreaking story to listen to this morning.
And I think one of the things that stuck with me as well was his point about his staff.
Yeah.
Because often when MPs are going through things like this or any kind of, I don't know, crisis or scandal or whatever it might be, people kind of think the MP is a sole lightning rod for that, but actually it's not. Our staff are incredible in supporting us through difficult times, through hard times, and they take so much brunt, so much stress, and I think that probably hasn't been at all considered by the parliamentary authorities on this either.
The public don't want MPs to be paid more, and the public don't like MPs having outside interests and outside earnings. Paul, how do we square that circle in your view?
It's difficult, and you can't listen to what Owen Paterson said without having sympathy for his predicament. And you touched, Nigel, in the interview on the Cash for Questions scandal back in the 1990s, and I think that's coloured a lot of the thinking, actually, even to today, where two Tory MPs effectively accused of taking bribes on behalf of companies that were paying them a lot of money. It strikes me that what Owen Paterson didn't really fall into that category at all. He was raising critical issues of safety. But I guess my point would be, look, in terms of MPs having wider interests, to keep them in touch with the real world, as they often say when they're defending it. It always seems to me that those interests tend to be very well remunerated interests, as directors of important blue chip companies. Why not go and work in a factory for a week? Why not sweep the roads for a week? That would really keep you in touch with the stresses and strains of everyday life for most people. So I'm uncomfortable that these interests seem to be, very handsomely paid the whole time. We do need demarcation, of course, between MPs who are involved in business and also their parliamentary activities. But I have sympathy for the guy. I thought he put quite a compelling case, to be fair.
An MP's salary is £81,000 a year, which, compared to many jobs, is well paid. However, think what the majority of GPs earn. Think what the majority of headmasters and headmistresses earn. Think what the half a dozen senior officials in every council in the land earn. And you could make an argument that actually there are a lot of people in politics earning a lot less than they would be out in the real world.
But I think that's true. I certainly do think that's true. But I think being a member of Parliament is a great honour and almost should be seen as a vocation. That's not to say, we should pay MPs the minimum wage. Of course not, because it's a difficult job, it's a responsible job, they work hard. But at the same time, you don't want MPs earning a salary that is in a different stratosphere to ordinary working people. One of the crucial things about being an MP, I think, is that you are subject to similar strains and stresses that ordinary people have in their everyday lives. And if you're off earning £300,000 a year for doing that job, then that probably wouldn't apply to you. So I believe they should be well paid, but not to a degree where there becomes a real disconnect with the lives of ordinary people.
Yeah, it really is difficult. I mean, I was one of those people. I went from private business to being an MEP. I earned a lot less money in politics than I would have done outside. And there's more people, I think, in that position. Do you have any sense, Deanna, how this vote might go on Wednesday?
I don't at the moment, no. I think there are colleagues who have an awful lot of sympathy for Owen, but we'll just have to see how it plays out. I don't even know if there'll be a full debate on it or not. Sort of waiting to hear how that'll look on Wednesday, but certainly watch this space, and I'm sure we'll be reporting the results of it here on GB News.
Join my show, Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m, Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio.